I had it all from the outside looking in. I had the big house, the big cars, the 3 children, lived in a great community, and still do, thankfully. But what people didn't know is that my entire infrastructure of my life, despite the facade, was falling apart. And I didn't quite know it, because I think one of the lessons that I have learned through my experience, which I will share with all of you today, is that I was not living in the moment. I wasn't listening to the signs that my body was giving me as major clues that something was very, very wrong. And I realized this very specifically when I never should have done this, but I got on a plane to do a speaking engagement in Atlantic City. It was May of 2005, and I could barely get through this speech. It was the most difficult thing I had ever done. I was so grateful. There was a waiter there who kept bringing me tea and ginger ale, and I had one of the most embarrassing moments of my life, literally getting sick between these 2 sessions and vomiting into a planter that was in this ballroom. So it was a pretty low moment. I was able, thank goodness, to get myself out of Atlantic City and back to Boston, because I could tell, I knew something was really wrong. The week before, I had been in and out of the ER. I had been to see my doctor. I had no symptoms that related to ultimately what I found out I was going through. And they thought I might have pneumonia. They thought I might have bronchitis. And I thought, this is the flu. I'm going to get over this. I'm going to do the speaking engagement, and I'm going to get home. And by the time I got finished in Atlantic City, I knew I had to get home, and I knew something was very, very wrong. I literally could not walk off the airplane. I had to ask the flight attendant when I got on for there to be a wheelchair available when I got off the plane, which was a very short flight back to Boston. And my friend picked me up at the airport, and I said, I need to go back to the ER right now. And she took me to the ER that I had been to twice earlier that week in Concord, Massachusetts, where I live. It's a local community hospital, Emerson. And thank God I was seen right away. And I don't have much memory after that, except my friend told me that when I looked at this nurse who came in, that I looked as if an angel had appeared. I was just so grateful that somebody was addressing this issue and taking care of me. The next morning, I awoke to people coming in with stretchers and my family around me. And I was being immediately transported to Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, a great hospital in Boston. Still feeling unsure about what was going on, knowing that something was very wrong, but not knowing what. And I literally got to BI I was put into the SICU unit, which I thought was kind of extreme. But again, I didn't know how sick I was. I knew something was very wrong, but I didn't realize how sick I was. And one of the first nurses I saw there was a gentleman named Frank. And I remember my mother saying, I really wish you didn't have a male doctor or male nurse. I was like, that was the least of my worries at the time. Little did my mother know that I also had a thong on that day. So mothers don't need to know everything. Frank was amazing, but the seed was planted that this wasn't maybe a good guy. And what I didn't know is that within 3 days, I would be in an induced coma. And my doctor, just before my last memory of anything being said to me, was my doctor came in and said, Nancy, you are experiencing kidney failure and liver failure. Your kidneys were improving, but your liver isn't. And you need a liver transplant. And it was as if somebody was speaking a different language to me. I mean, I obviously knew that organ transplants were possible. I just never could have put myself in that position of needing one. And I was in and out of consciousness, so I just thought, how is this ever going to happen? I mean, why? What's the reason for this? And I remember being poked and prodded literally everywhere on my body. And that's really all I remember. That's my last memory of these sort of significant milestones, at least for me at that time, of these medical professionals telling me what was so gravely wrong. And that was on May 15th. And my next memory was looking at a calendar that said July 17th. And a young female intern came in, it was 7:13 a.m. in the morning, and she was looking at all of the machines around me. I could hear these beeping noises, and I saw this massive chart on the wall that had a ton of tiny writing on it. And she literally walked right by me and didn't look at me and went over to the machines that were next to me. And my eyes were sort of following her. And at some point, she turned and looked to me and said, like, was visibly shaken, and started to ask me questions. Did I know what year it was? Did I know who the president was? Did I know where I was? And I did. I actually did know. But I couldn't speak because I had been intubated 2 weeks after my organ transplant. Within 5 minutes, my room was filled with, I felt like it was the beautiful people. I thought I was on the set of Grey's Anatomy. It was all these young, gorgeous interns, doctors, nurses. And then I realized, no, it was an episode of House, and I was the main character. Not a place I wanted to be. My brother, Tom, came in 2 days later and asked me if I wanted to know what happened to me. And I shook my head and said, yes, I do. And he said, okay. And he very gently and calmly told me that I had had a liver transplant, that my organ donor was a woman. She was 21 years old. She had 2 children, babies really, an 8-month-old and a 2-year-old. And that my surgery was very long, it was very complicated. He didn't tell me that I had died twice during the surgery, and that was probably better that he didn't say that at that point, because I think I might have been too afraid to take all that in. And he also told me that I had had brain surgery while I was in a coma. It happened about 2 weeks after my surgery, my liver transplant. And he asked me if I wanted to look at myself. And I cannot believe that I said yes, because what I was expecting was my head to be completely shaved. What I didn't realize is that you really can't do that. When you're operating on someone's brain or any part of their body that needs to be shaved, it's only in that area. So I remember Frank, my nurse, being with him when he was telling me this. And he held up this mirror, and it was like I could not believe the reflection that I was seeing. And within 2 or 3 days, I was literally asking for my hairstylist to come in and cut all of my hair off. I just thought, this is not going to be a good look to grow out. I'm going to start over. And unfortunately, he couldn't come in, so I was begging this nurse to cut it off. I told my brother to please get somebody in here who will just cut this hair off. And I was so grateful that she did. I could tell that she was hesitant because it was just so, I think, difficult for her. I mean, it was difficult for me, but I knew ultimately it would grow back, and I didn't want to have this situation of having to try to grow this section of my head out. And she cut it all off, and my parents came in and were shocked that I had made this decision to do that. But it was one of the kindest things that she could have done for me, because I know it was very difficult for her to do. So I was in ICU for a total of 3 months. 2, I was in a coma, and 1, I was awake and unable to speak. And I kept asking, it was in the summer, I kept asking, could I go outside? I was trying to mouth it out. And it was very difficult, obviously, for people to understand what I was attempting to say. I couldn't write because my muscles had atrophied so much. And each time I asked about going outside, they'd say, no, you're really too immune suppressed. We really don't think it's a good idea for you to go out. And one day, Frank who was working actually on a different unit at this point in time, came up early from his shift and said, I had a CAT scan that I had to have done. And he said, I'm going to take Nancy down, okay? And everybody was like, yeah, that's fine. So he took me down, I had my CAT scan, and then he said, as I was getting, wheeled out of that room, he said, I have a surprise for you. And we were going through really the bowels of the hospital. I didn't know where we were until finally he opened these huge double doors, and I was on the loading dock of Beth Israel Hospital. And it was an amazingly gorgeous sunny day in August. And he pushed me into the sun. It was the first time I had been outside in almost 3 months. And it was the most ideal day. He came in early to do that for me, to take me for that, that procedure before his shift started. And it's something that just was maybe not significant in his mind, but it made such a huge difference in my day. And I think that's one of the things that I do want to let people know too, that through this experience, for me, I live in the moment so much more than I did prior to this happening. And I think the important message for people in your profession to know is that as patients, we are in the present. And it's usually not good, what we're thinking, what we're feeling. So any communication, any act of kindness that is certainly above and beyond what you do each day is incredibly appreciated by somebody who is a patient like myself and the many people that you treat every day. And I'm not only talking about nurses, because I have to be honest with you, I had some of the nicest smiles, greetings from the custodial help. I'm not talking just about, nurses or interns or doctors. It really goes across the board in terms of making a patient experience better. And I think most of it comes down to really the way you communicate with your patients. And I think compassionate communication is really what will provide exceptional patient care and patient satisfaction. And these things are not on the data sheets for the most part of the surveys that we all fill out after we leave a hospital. I wasn't able to write down those questions or those responses to a question that might be more open-ended about what made this or who made this a better experience. And those small key things were huge to me in my experience as a patient. And as Medicaid and Medicare become more focused on with HCAHPS and judging and rewarding financially or penalizing hospitals and healthcare systems based on what your patient satisfaction scores are, I think these are the small things that make a huge difference and that don't cost a lot of money. They cost nothing. They cost somebody who is in a caretaking position to be conscious and aware and compassionate about the person that they are taking care of.